Good morning. It is Wednesday, May the 8th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, one of only two true conservatives in the United States of America, the other being President Donald J. Trump, and we're the only true conservatives because we're the only ones that make the presumption for the status quo, speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. So I'd like to open with something from Operation Hawkeye, and it's on Instagram at op_Hawkeye, and they memorialize fallen soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And today's soldier is Sergeant Timothy Paul Paget from the U.S. Army, and he died in Afghanistan. He was born January 13th, 1978, and died May 8th, 2007. He was awarded the Purple Heart and was killed in action in the War on Terrorism during Operation Enduring Freedom. And so we want to honor those that have fallen, who have made the ultimate sacrifice. And now what I want to do is give some news items. I listen to a lot of pundits, a lot of talk show hosts throughout the day, and usually they're going to quote the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times, and very often they're talking about stories that are unflattering to Republicans, conservatives, and President Trump specifically. And I always found that rather puzzling. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to demoralize your audience, assuming that your audience is made up primarily of conservatives or even reactionaries? And I guess that's the whole point. If you're a reactionary, that's what you want to do, is go ahead and get, you react yourself, and you assume that your followers are equally reactionary. So I'm going to be reading from articles from the Washington Times instead of the New York Times, two of the newspapers that I like to read, one of the two, the other one being the Orange County Register. So the other thing I don't get is that a lot of pundits want to trash various newspapers, New York Times, LA Times, and say that they're nothing but left-wing rags, et cetera, but then they'll quote articles from them. So that makes no sense to me. It's contradictory, and I believe it hurts one's credibility to do that. And it's just wrong. So the first article is called Appeals Court, Trump Can Make Asylum Seekers Wait in Mexico. This is from San Diego. A federal appeals court ruled Tuesday that the Trump administration can make asylum seekers wait in Mexico for immigration court hearings while the policy is challenged in court, handing the president a major victory, even if it only proves temporary. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, a frequent target of the president's complaints, reversed a decision by a San Francisco judge that would have prevented asylum seekers from being returned to Mexico during the legal challenge. The case must still be considered on its merits and could end up at the Supreme Court, but allowing the policy to remain in effect in the meantime lets the administration carry out an unprecedented change to U.S. asylum practices. The administration has said its plans to rapidly expand the policy across the border, which would have far-reaching consequences for asylum seekers and Mexican border cities that host them while their cases wind through the clogged U.S. immigration courts. Cases can take several years to decide. And so I'm reading this article for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's an article that's positive. It throws some positive light on the Trump administration and on a conservative issue. And so very often, again, with Donald or with Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, etc., or at all, they want to talk about things that are in which court cases are going against the president. The Ninth Circuit ruled against them and ruled against the president and why they did, and this big long analysis as to what's going on with the left, why the left is doing what it's doing. And it just seems to me counterproductive. Why do I want to spend a whole lot of time talking about the left? I'd rather promote conservatism than, and I believe that one defeats socialism by promoting conservatism rather than taking, and not only believe, I know it, that you're going to defeat it, socialism, by promoting capitalism and conservatism rather than critiquing the left, because all you end up doing is glorifying, in essence, especially Rush Limbaugh, who has such a large audience. If he goes ahead and quotes somebody from CNN who currently has a 700,000 people watching it, so they have a much smaller audience than Rush Limbaugh, and so when he quotes CNN or somebody at CNN, he's doing them a favor, he's helping them out, and I just don't see any reason to do that. So, and the other reason that I wanted to quote this was because this article was because it is valid from the standpoint, so many times there are articles in the newspaper that are arbitrary. There's arbitrary statements, which means statements that are made without evidence. If somebody's called, for instance, a racist or a misogynist or a homophobe, but no evidence is provided to back up that particular claim, then it's an arbitrary claim. Well, in news articles, the way they do arbitrary articles is by refusing to cite a source. So in this particular case, they did cite a source, and that source was the federal Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. So this is something that I would feel free quoting or putting on my podcast. So the next article is also from the Washington Times. All of them this morning are going to be Washington Times articles. And the headline is, Louisiana Republicans win Democrats' support with first Obamacare replacement. If the states are the laboratories of democracy, then the Republican Party has an Obamacare alternative in a test tube wending its way toward the governor's desk in Louisiana. The momentous-sounding health care coverage for Louisiana Families Protection Act would use high-risk pools to cover residents struggling with pre-existing conditions, an issue that has bedeviled Republicans in Washington. In Louisiana, though, the Republican idea won backing from both parties and cleared the state Senate on Monday evening on a 38-0 vote. It now heads toward near certain approval in the state House, where the Speaker is a co-sponsor, and would then reach the desk of Governor John Bel Edwards, a Democrat, who will face a tricky election year decision of whether to sign or veto the bill. State Attorney General Jeff Landry, a former Republican congressman, has spearheaded the effort, saying it would inject real competition into the health insurance market, reduce costs for consumers, and provide a safety net for those whose pre-existing conditions, such as cancer and diabetes. They didn't finish the sentence there. What we're doing is going back to Federalist principles, working within the long-established powers of the state, Mr. Landry said. It will be interesting to see what the governor will do, unquote. The bill is meant to be an Obamacare replacement poised to go into effect should a Republican-led lawsuit against the 2010 federal health care law succeed. Mr. Landry is one of the Republican state attorneys general taking part in that challenge. The bill would call for Louisiana's Insurance Commission to open the insurance market to anyone not covered by an employer's plan. Following carefully crafted rules, insurance companies and the state commissioner would determine who belongs in a high-risk pool, what the bill's sponsors repeatedly stress as a, quote, guaranteed benefits pool, unquote. The key is that buyers would not know who is in the pool. The pool would be funded through a monthly charge on every policy sold, and with money the state pays Washington through a niche in Obamacare regulations. Quote, we have a real opportunity here to be the first in the nation to recognize what we all know is true. And so we'll just leave it on there at unquote. Well, now maybe we can go ahead and get... Okay, that what we all know is true, that the Affordable Care Act is unaffordable and does not work, unquote, Mr. Landry said. Quote, this will put things back in the consumer's hand, unquote. I like this article because, again, one of the big issues in Republican politics today is the unwillingness of Congress to go ahead and keep its promise. All of the members of Congress, Republican members, ran for office on the promise of replacing Obamacare, and they failed to do it. They voted, of course, when it was safe to do so, to repeal and replace, or at least repeal Obamacare when President Obama was in office, when he could, of course, veto it. But when it came time when President Trump was in office and could sign the bill, all of a sudden the Republicans got cold feet. And supposedly there was one of the biggest issues was pre-existing conditions. So what do you do with people with pre-existing conditions? So this is an exciting situation where there may prove to be an insurance solution to people with pre-existing conditions. And so we'll have to see how this works out, whether or not it gets signed into law, and if it gets signed into law, whether or not it's going to work. So it looks like it's going to be months or maybe a few years before we find all that out. All right, the next article is called, the title is GOP Embraces Trump-Backed Immigration Plan. President Trump detailed a draft version of his immigration plan for Republican senators Tuesday, calling for overall levels of legal immigration to remain the same, but for the government to prioritize workers with prized skills over extended family members looking to reunite. The bill also, quote, closes all loopholes, unquote, that illegal immigrants are using to gain a foothold in the U.S., making good on Mr. Trump's border security plans, a senior administration official said. While still a work in progress, the plan marks an important ante for the White House and ongoing demands for a comprehensive immigration debate that would go beyond the border security fracas that has dominated the first 2 years of Mr. Trump's tenure. The president shared the plan with a dozen conservative Republican senators during a meeting at the White House, promising them the changes will have the effect of boosting U.S. workers, not creating paths for competition for jobs or pay. Quote, that was met positively from the senators, unquote, the senior official said. And then the article goes on to say that the White House has offered no time frame for completing the proposal. Now, this is one of those situations where this is a little bit more awkward because, on the one hand, there is, we know where the information was gotten because there's some open source situations here. The president briefed the senators, and that was no secret, so a reporter could attend and get the information that way. But the one thing that bothers me, again, is that they didn't cite who the senior administration official is, just as the senior administration official. So that's an unnamed source, and I don't particularly like that. But I'm going to go ahead and cite the article anyways because, like I said, most of it is open source. So when I come back, I'm going to read there's a Tammy Bruce editorial that I'd like to go ahead and read. Thank you very much. Welcome back. And this is from the analysis and opinion section of the Washington Times, and I'm reading this, by the way, online. So it's an article by Tammy Bruce, and it is called How the Left Targets American History, Heroes, and Statues. We are living in a time when certain Congresspeople sound more concerned about the Palestinian people than American citizens, as none of the 2020 Democrat President hopefuls issued any support for Israel as that nation suffered under attack of 700 rockets from the terrorist group Hamas-controlled West Bank. So it's not entirely surprising that two stories featuring a high school and a college trying to erase the Founding Fathers didn't get much attention. After all, America is the problem, they tell us. But there is good news during this time when some want this country to be considered the great Satan and unworthy of support. And one of the best ways to take a nation from inside is to destroy its history and heroes. While they try, the good news is some are pushing back. In the recent past, attempts to erase American history manifested as vandalism or protest to remove commemorating Confederate generals and Southern Civil War dead. But our past is a fact, one that reminds us how far we have come. We absolutely should have conversations about our history, as being an American is like practicing medicine. You must work at it every day. But becoming a better people and nation requires knowing and understanding your past. Toppling statues and erasing people from paintings and pictures accomplishes one thing: making it impossible to understand who we are. And perhaps that's the point. Now, instead of focusing on the Civil War Southern military imagery, the move to condemning the Founding Fathers is here. A working group at a high school in Northern California has recommended archiving a panel painting featuring former President George Washington. The College Fix reported the group's statement, quote, "We come to these recommendations due to the continued historical and current trauma of Native Americans and African Americans with these depictions in the mural that glorifies slavery, genocide, colonization, manifest destiny, white supremacy, oppression, etc. This mural doesn't represent San Francisco Unified School District values of social justice, diversity, united, student-centered. It's not student-centered if it's focused on the legacy of artists rather than the experience of the students," unquote. Just a second here. Okay, there we go. In other words, context matters, but don't tell that to anyone desperate to apply today's social justice warrioring to the past. The mural's future remains to be decided. In March, on the opposite coast of the country, students at Hofstra University in New York rallied once again to have a statue of Thomas Jefferson removed. Fox News reports, quote, "Hofstra University student activists are calling for the removal of a statue of Thomas Jefferson from campus near New York City because they say the third American president represents racism and slavery." Students participated Friday in the second annual, quote, "Jefferson has got to go," unquote, event over the statue that has been subject to protests and acts of vandalism in the past, with some previously defacing it with "decolonize" and "Black Lives Matter" slogans, unquote. A petition to remove the statue argues, quote, "Jefferson's values aided in the construction of institutionalized racism and justified the subjugation of black people in the United States." The petition read, "Jefferson has been embraced as an icon by white supremacists and neo-Nazi organizations such as Ku Klux Klan and online white supremacist chat rooms," unquote. So now we're going to let racist lunatics in online chat rooms control how we view the past and present? Let's not. The fact is, the Founding Fathers were flawed people. We all are in some fashion. The good news is we constantly work at becoming a better people and nation. We endured a horrific civil war costing the lives of at least 620,000 Americans, specifically to change who we were. While the call to erase people from history, to take down statues, and remove art is couched in terms of safety or preventing trauma, the fact of the matter is you can only begin to destroy a nation by erasing its past and killing its heroes. Americans have historically made clear we reject racism and bigotry. Appealing to that sense of fairness makes sense, especially when the goal is to strike at the heart of a nation's history from which we derive our understanding of ourselves. The United States exists as an idea. We are a nation which was not naturally formed due to geography, language, or a shared history. Being an American stems from the idea of freedom. If you can demonize those who establish that idea, remove them from the public square, and even make it dangerous to discuss or laud them, America itself begins to disappear. The left knows this full well. For everyone else who understands this vital importance of our history, it's time to make sure we do not surrender to this bizarre assault on our founding, our heroes, and the past in general. Yes, Tammy Bruce is correct when she says that there is some sort of a conspiracy afoot. The left is nothing if not activist. Act first, think later. None of this, what's been done on the left, has been thought through. Again, it's emotions are what cause the left to get into gear and become active. They act first, think later, and that means basically rationalize their behavior. So, but what this is ultimately about is property, and the left, I think, that's their ultimate aim here, is to obliterate property as a concept and property rights as a concept, because what we're talking about is two One is a school district on the West Coast, and the other is a college on the East Coast. And each one of those are property. The school district can decide whether or not it wants a painting of George Washington on its property. It's perfectly right for it to do so. Hofstra University can decide whether or not it wants a statue of Thomas Jefferson on its property. It's perfectly right to make that decision. It's perfectly right to put it up, and it's perfectly right to take it down. Whether or not, what statue they put up, whether it's Thomas Jefferson or if they put up one of some Ku Klux Klan guy, is an issue really of taste and good judgment. But ultimately, it is a property rights issue, just the same way I have the right to put up whatever statue I want to within the bounds of, if I have a house, for instance, or whatever the rules of the community that I live in. So I'm not going to be driving down property values. I may end up getting challenged for that reason, or sued, actually. But other than that, as long as I'm not doing something that's uncivil or illegal, then I can do with my property as I see fit. If I want to put up a statue or take it down, I can do so, and so can the San Francisco Unified School District and the Hofstra University. So by jumping in and the other thing with her article, I was going to say, by jumping in and disagreeing with or suggesting that they shouldn't do this, that they shouldn't take Thomas Jefferson down, or they shouldn't take the picture of Washington down, you begin to erode away the idea, the concept of property and of property rights. The issue becomes one that's up for a vote. And if the San Francisco School District can't decide to take down a picture, neither can I, neither can you, then everything becomes up for a vote. Then you're going to have to, before you do anything to your property, you're going to have to announce it maybe to the world, maybe to the neighborhood, and let everybody decide whether or not the change that you want to make is valid, is politically correct, for a lack of a better term. So Tammy Bruce missed that, and as do most people, and realize that that's ultimately what the left is about. They want socialist paradise, and in their version of socialist paradise, there is no property. There is no private property, and there is no privacy, because privacy is the whole reason for having private property in the first place. So, this brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill, but I did want to say that, again, I think that I will be reading again, spending more time, less time critiquing Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity et al., and more time reading the articles and kind of leading by example kind of a situation, talking about the things and demonstrating the way I think other conservative or ersatz conservative pundits should be doing things. Read the articles that are, spend more time promoting conservatism, read articles and critique articles that are flattering or put Republicans and conservatives in a positive light. Of course, if there's a legit criticism, and again, that goes back whether or not it's legit, but if there's a legit criticism of Republicans or conservatives, in other words, something that is not arbitrary. Okay, there's evidence to support that a particular criticism, fine, so be it. But other than that, spend more time. The Republicans and conservatives should spend much more time reading articles and commenting on articles that promote conservatism rather than being simply anti-liberal or anti-socialist. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.